Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Logic and Lore Variants from Weird Giraffe Games, an expansion to Logic and Lore, a game I absolutely adored. I should note, this is a crowdfunding campaign. I'll have a link to it down below, as well as the fact that all the expansion components over here are prototypes, so the base game is regular, but the expansion components are a prototype, so all of that is subject to change. Let me start with a general overview of Logic and Lore. I'm going to be very quick about it, but the basic idea is a two-player deduction game in which you're going to go ahead and grab two cards, hold them up, and then ask a series of questions. For example, are these in the right spot? So for example, if this was a 7 or if this is a 4, you would point to those cards and say they're in the right spot. But then you go through an escalating series of questions, stopping as soon as you get an affirmative answer. You can choose to skip various questions, but you're basically trying to deduce information. Are they on the right side of the board? If you swap them, would they be in the right spot? Are they one removed? Which one is greater? You're basically working your way through questions, trying to decide which ones are primed to give you the most information, while you track that information as much as possible with various tokens, until eventually you've gotten all your cards in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and shown that you have aligned the stars. That's the basic idea. You're asking a series of questions, piecing together information, and trying to be faster at it than your opponent. Variance adds a few small things. The first thing it does is it adds a quality of life tracking area. This is going to be sheets of paper over here that basically you have these tokens where you can mark cards. You can ask a question and you can say, oh, well, I just asked a question about this card. I'm going to mark it with that token. And then on this sheet, I'm going to mark that C was not in 7, so it's not 7. Also, it was not adjacent to 6 or 8, so I can mark those off as well. And you can slowly track information better than you could in the original game. The other thing it adds is it adds two new play modes. It adds Star Flight and Star Sprite. That's going to be a player rewards from the original game modes. We have Star Flight and Star Bright over here. No, not Star Bright, that's the original game. Star Flight and Star Sprite are the two new game modes. They're very similar, but I'll kind of walk you through them over here. This will be a lot easier to understand if you know the base game as is, but I'm still going to go ahead and dive into it. Let's start off with Star Flight over here. Star Flight is basically going to have you having a card over here with a bunch of dice on it. On your turn, you're going to move your mouse over here. Each player is going to have a mouse, and you can move your mouse, paying dragon tokens into the supply in order to move it further around the board. The reason you're doing that is you're trying to gauge which dice is better for your questions. For example, in my case, I might pay that dragon to move one more because I'd rather ask questions about a 4 right now. Then you're going to go through the questions on the Starflight card instead of the questions on these cards. In the basic Logic and Lore, you have questions on the other side, depending on the mode you're playing as, and in Starflight, you're using the questions over here. So you're still going through in order. You're going to go ahead and ask the questions. Alignment. Are either of these cards aligned? That's always the basic starting question you ask. You hold up two cards. Are they in the right spot? But from there, you're going to be asking questions based on the die you chose, which is why that number matters. Asking based on a 4 is going to help me out, because then I'll go to bounds. Is either card lower than the rolled value, in this case a 4? So is either card lower than a 4? Speaking of which, by the way, you'll be rolling the dice as you pass through, but you have a choice of what card you're going to be ending up on as you go. So is either card lower than a 4? That can give me a lot of information because most cards are not lower than a 4, so if either of the two cards I'm holding are lower than a 4, that's very helpful. From then we go to magnitude. Is the sum of the cards higher than the rolled value? That's often helpful for higher values. If you have a 10, that can tell you a lot of information. Proximity. Is this card within the rolled value space of where it should be? So is this card within 4 of where it should be? If I'm pointing to a card like this, and I say, is it within 4 of where it should be? That again gives me a lot of information. Then you have resonance. Is one of the cards the rolled value? Again, in this case, a 4. Is either of the two cards I'm showing you a 4? Again, deductive information. And then lastly, we have the standard question, which of these is greater? And so basically it takes the core game of Logic and Lore, but it centers the game around these dice instead of just a general series of questions. So now you're trying to pay attention to which dice are on the board, where you want your mouse to stop, how much you're willing to pay to move extra, and then as usual, what series of questions do you want to skip or not. The other side, Star Sprite, is going to be the same basic idea, but in this case you're asking a slightly different series of questions, and instead of having this mouse tracking over here, instead what you have is you have a different side of this board in which you're going to have the dice on here, and you're just going to be pulling dice from these boards, and this time you're going to be rolling them as you pull. So you don't really know what you're getting until you pull it. So you can go ahead and pull a die and say, I'm going to want this die. You're going to roll it, and you're also going to be able to mark that you've used that die with one of your dragon tokens. That's important because once you have all 6 dragon tokens, you can actually choose a die and set it to any value that you want with complete determination based on that. There's also ways to spend dragon tokens to adjust the value of the die, and then you're going to have a slightly different series of questions, both in terms of the order, as well as having one more question added over there. But past that, it's basically the same core engine. It's relying on the dice to drive the questions as opposed to the general cards on the table. That's what the expansion adds. It's worth noting before I dive into my thoughts and opinions, you can mix things up as well. You can have one player playing one mode versus the other. The game is compatible with all the black holes and other elements from the base game. So there's different ways you can play it, but those are the core idea of what the expansion adds. Which means it's time for my review. What I like, all of that stuff. I'm gonna just go straight into this one. It's not gonna be really a category of what I like, don't like, and see what's not liking. There's not a ton to really go over here. Logic and Lore Variance expands upon the game Logic and Lore. I love Logic and Lore, I think it's absolutely amazing, and Variance I think is nice to have. Basically it adds two core things. A new game mode that revolves around the dice, and then a new tracking mode. The tracking mode is a quality of life thing, use it or don't. I like it in some capacity. I specifically like it when I'm using the dice. I find it's too hard to track the game without that. So if you're playing with the dice, I think the new tracking is super important. If you're playing the original base game, I'm more pros and cons on it. Yes, it gives you more perfect information, but to me, some of the charm of Logic and Lore is the fact that it's not a perfect deductive game. There's a dash of memory, a little bit of deduction, a little bit of gut feeling in there, and overall, it really came together very well for me. Adding in the tracking mode to the base game kind of makes it a little bit more deductive and a little less gut feel, which might be better for you. For me, it's a step back in the base game. But when playing it, because I've done it, I've done the new tracking mode both in the base game and with the expansion content. With the new expansion content in the dice, I find that's a little harder to track with just tokens because you're constantly using different values instead of having a set core aspect going on. And so with that, I do find that the tracking is almost essential when you're playing with the new dice elements. Speaking of which, the new dice elements, there are two modes. There's Star Bright and Star Flight and Star Sprite. Those are the two new modes. I do find they are very similar as far as the feeling they give. Yes, there are different nuances as far as how you get those dice, whether you're moving a mouse along and tracking it, whether you're rolling a dice, there's slightly nuanced differences to it, even the order of the questions. But as far as feeling, for the most part, it's the same general feeling, meaning it's a big pivot from the core game, but the two modes are kind of very adjacent as far as the feeling they give me. And overall, I would say I like them for the sake of variety, but I don't think they're my go-to mode. I think my go-to mode is still preferring the base game of Logic and Lore, although there's a lot of modules in there as well. These expansions so far, I've enjoyed them, but I've gone back and forth between them. It wasn't like I played the expansions and then I was like, that's it, that's how I'm playing Logic and Lore from now on. Not really. I've played them a bunch already because I like this game a lot. It's an easy game to table, but I found that like I played the first expansion, then I went back to the base game. Then I played the second expansion, went back to the base game. And I've been going back and forth, integrating them as I go. I think I have a slight preference for the base game, but the expansions are good for variety. Which brings me to rating and final thoughts. Overall, I'm going to give the expansion a 3.5 out of 5. Logic and Lore, to be clear to me, is a 4.5 out of 5 game. I love Logic and Lore. I think it's fantastic. I do grade expansions based on what they add to that package, and for me, this is nice for the variety, but because of the fact that it's kind of like sometimes I'll use elements of it, sometimes not, it's a 3.5 out of 5. If you like Logic and Lore a lot, it might be worth picking up, but I don't think it's necessarily essential. In any case, and until next time, this has been my review for Logic and Lore Variance. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this useful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.